Hi, my name is Hana Berhe. I'm currently taking Global Environmental Health, and this is my presentation on radiation waste in Goonya, Brazil. As we go through the table of contents, I will be talking about our purpose and objectives. I will also be talking about the capital, Carindo, which is Goonya, Brazil, and we will go into figure 1, which is composition of GDP in Goiás, and then we will also talk about the Goonya Accident, which occurred in 1976, which we will further go into figure 2, exposure of dosage outcome. Then from there we will talk about cesium-137 and what it is, and then from there we will go into figure 3 and figure 4. Lastly, we will talk about environmental impact and lasting damage from radiation waste. And from there, we will go into figure 5, which is levels of radiation waste by continent, Europe, and America. Then from there, we will talk about summary and references. Our purpose and objectives with this presentation is to learn about the cause of the Goonya accident and the aftermath of the incident. Elaborate and explain radioactive material left unattended and the health effects of those exposed to radioactive contamination. And lastly, to implement the connection between environmental impact and city negligence as well as radiation waste. So starting off, we will talk about the capital, Carindo, which is Goonya, Brazil, which is another nickname for the city. The capital, Carindo, otherwise known as Goonya, is a city located in the state of Goiás, which is in the central west part of Brazil. The population is about 1.2 million, and it's a city that is experiencing rapid population growth as well as rapid urbanization. It is a city that has an important economic hub that revolves around 3 things, which is agriculture, livestock, and mining. And lastly, it is a city of multiple races and ethnicities, and the primary religion being Catholicism. So with the figure 1, our composition of GDP in Goiás, which is a pie chart, and essentially shows that our GDP is divided into 3 main sectors, which is services, which is the most, composes of 65% of the GDP, farming, which composes of 10% of the GDP, and industry, which composes of the 25% of the GDP. So this just goes to show how their economic hub functions and what contributes the most to the GDP. Talking about the Goonya accident, this occurred on September 13th, 1976, when essentially a nuclear incident occurred in Goonya after an old radiotherapy device containing cesium-137 was stolen from an abandoned hospital. So essentially what had happened was 2 people had gone into the hospital, and it was completely abandoned. They were just looking around at things left behind, and they had come across the radiotherapy device, not knowing it had contained cesium-137, which is a radioactive chemical, and essentially they took apart part of the device, which they had exposed themselves to radiation at that point, but then they took the device home and further disassembled it, which immediately gave them massive exposure to radiation, and actually instantaneously they immediately began to feel the effects of radiation sickness. So not knowing what the device was and finding it kind of useless, they sold the items of the radioactive device to a junkyard, and then from that junkyard it was sold to another junkyard where it was eventually handled by multiple people, leading to further radiation exposure. So by that time multiple people had been experiencing radiation sickness and went to seek medical care, and the doctors from the hospital came to see that they were experiencing radiation sickness and alerted the appropriate figures, and by the time people were aware of what was happening, nearly 250 people had been exposed, and ultimately 4 people ended up dying from radiation sickness. So the 2 figures that I have on the right is, one figure is just showing essentially what the radioactive radiotherapy device had looked like, and another is just pinpointing where Goonya is on the map so you can have a perspective of what the city looks like. Figure 2 is essentially showing the exposure of dosage and outcome results, and this is a line graph. So we have three scenarios depending on exposure of dosage and the outcome, and we have three outcomes, which is hospitalization, outpatient treatment, and ultimately death. So anybody who had very low amounts of dosage to cesium-137, anywhere from less than 0.5 to 2 or 3 to 4, essentially were either hospitalized or received outpatient care. But majority of people who had huge amounts of exposure, essentially more than 5 of the dosage, ultimately died from radiation sickness. So what is cesium-137? What is it? And what does it cause, and what is it used for? So essentially it's a radioisotopic that is formed by nuclear fission. It's known for its short lifetime, and it's known for its boiling point. So essentially it evaporates very easily at a high temperature, and it has a full wide range of usage. Medical radiation devices used in medical treatment is what it's mainly used for, and it's also used for flow meters. However, massive exposure to cesium-137 can cause acute radiation sickness, burns, cancer, and even death. So with figure 3, we're essentially looking at a teletherapy radiation capsule, much like the one that caused the Goonya accident. So I would say the three most important parts of this capsule are 14, which is the teletherapy source, which is the source of radiation. 13 is the cylinder, which is kind of like the outer protective barrier of the device. And then I would say definitely 11 as well, which works with the cylinder, and this is a protective shield. So figure 4 is essentially showing total of radiation waste going in versus other nuclear disasters. So I thought this would just put into perspective the amount of radiation waste from that one particular device in comparison to Chernobyl and Fukushima, which had multiple devices, multiple plants that were involved, and just essentially like the impact that radiation waste had on the general population versus this one small radiotherapy device that had impact basically because of passage versus like an explosion. So with the Goonya accident, afterwards there was only 3,500 of radiation waste left behind versus Chernobyl, which was almost 20,000, and versus Fukushima, which was more than 100,000. So with the environmental impact and the lasting damage from radiation waste, it's important to recognize that a lot of the major concern from radiation waste is the amount of emissions it releases, such like carbon dioxide. And essentially what happens with emission release is that it has the ability to cause soil infertility and toxicity, but it also can cause water pollution, which has impact on sea life. And then when you go further into examining radiation waste, it has a huge effect on humans. It can cause cancer, it can cause genetic mutations, it can cause central nervous system damage, and just a wide range of health issues. And all of these reasons and more, this is why radiation waste is so highly regulated, because this helps keep the environment and human beings safe, adding strict regulations to how the radiation waste is handled and disposed of. With our last figure, I was thinking of just showing levels of radiation waste in Europe and North America. So the ultimate goal with this was just to show how much radiation waste is still in the world, and two of the continents that it's most in. So Europe has a significant amount of radiation waste because it has Russia included, and Russia has one of the highest levels of radiation waste in the country because of the amount of nuclear plants that they have. And then North America as well. We've had nuclear plants, for instance, in Little Island, Pennsylvania. So you can see that it's divided into three categories. There's low level, intermediate level, and high level. Low level and intermediate level tend to have about equal parts of radiation waste, versus a high level tends to have the majority of radiation waste. So in conclusion, We learned that Goiânia, Brazil is a community that's expanding, progressing, and the accident that occurred there has shown the consequences of what happens when radioactive material is left unattended. We also learned that radiation waste is a serious issue, and when it's unregulated, it causes environmental issues and health issues among humans and animals. So I think what we can learn from this is that while there has been work done to regulate radiation waste, there's still a significant amount of it in the world, especially unregulated, and that there needs to be more work to eliminate radiation waste and bring about stricter regulations for the handling of it and the disposal of it. And this is my reference list. Thank you.